Father and daughter try to persuade Radames to flee with them, but he refuses. Amanazzo drags Aida away with him, pursued by soldiers. Radames remains, singing Sacerdote io resto a te, priest, I remain with thee, or yield to thee, and he hands the high priest his sword. Here are the three principals bowing. Frederick Diego as Radames, in the center, Yuba Valic, Aida, and holding her other hand, Frank Guerrera as Amanazzo. The solo bow by Mr. Guerrera. This performance of Aida, of which you have just heard the third act, is being broadcast from the stage of the Metropolitan Opera House in New York City by the Texas Company, makers of the internationally known Texaco Sky Chief and Fire Chief gasolines and Haviland motor oil. Be found wherever you see the big red Texaco star with the green T. Canadian listeners hear the broadcast through the courtesy of the McCall Frontenac Oil Company Limited. Before introducing the Metropolitan Artists Roundtable, let us have station identification, please.
You're listening to WTCN and WTCN-FM, St. Paul and Minneapolis.
And now, 6 great singing stars of the Metropolitan family, from Australia, from Greece, from Sweden, from Italy, and from the United States, join verbal hands in an impromptu round table addressed to the great Metropolitan family out at the ends of these radio waves who listen each Saturday afternoon. Here they are: John Brownlee, Risë Stevens, Kerstin Thorborg, Regina Resnik, Louis D'Angelo, and Nicola Moscona, with Mr. Brownlee holding the pointer to keep a reasonable amount of order and propriety. Mr. Brownlee.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are, 6 artists of the Metropolitan Opera, probably on the wrong side of the footlights, but anyway, we're here for a purpose. Yes, and it's a very good purpose. Last week, Mrs. August Belmont told you of the Metropolitan Opera Fund to raise $250,000 now through public contributions. This $250,000 is vitally necessary in order that the Metropolitan may put into effect now plans for next season that will guarantee a season of the highest artistic standards. We all regret that next year will be Edward Johnson's last as the Metropolitan General Manager. Certainly, every one of us wants to do his share to make his final season one of the happiest and greatest. This fund will also provide for at least 2 new operatic productions and revivals, and that should be very good news to all opera lovers. It will also assure the ample rehearsal facilities so essential to superlative opera. Finally, it will finance engineering and architectural studies of plans for the future housing of the Metropolitan Opera Company. There's been a lot of talk about this old opera house. Well, let's find out once and for all what we ought to do about it. These needs, of course, concern every Metropolitan artist. And naturally, we prefer to sing. But when it comes to speaking our minds on something we consider important, maybe we are just as articulate as the next fellow. Here with me today to talk about art, opera, and of all things, economics, are, counting myself, 6 singers who are very proud to be labeled Metropolitan. A group whom I might call a miniature operatic United Nations. Miss Risë Stevens and Miss Regina Resnik from the United States, Madam Kerstin Thorborg from Sweden, Mr. Nicola Moscona from Greece, and Louis D'Angelo from Italy. Oh, Madam Thorborg, from the sparkle in your eyes there, I gather you have something to say.
Indeed, I have, Mr. Brownlee. It is just this. I hope every sincere opera lover in this country realizes the great importance and the significance of this campaign. In Sweden, as it happens, we do it differently. There, the government finances our operas. The people pay indirectly through taxes. But that is not the American way. In America, support of opera comes from money paid at the box office, from broadcasts and from records, but also from the voluntary contributions of private citizens who believe it essential that we keep alive American cultural institutions. In Sweden, our opera season is on a yearly basis. Every single member, musician, artist, stagehand, ballet, is engaged for the entire year. This means long-range planning is possible. Certainly, the thousands of friends of Mr. Johnson will want to give him this final opportunity to plan our next season with reasonable time ahead. Such planning will probably pay very unusual dividends next year.
Do you mean, Miss Thorborg, that in Sweden you sign an exclusive agreement for an entire year?
Yes, for a year. But it is possible to get a leave of absence when we have opportunities elsewhere.
And do you always get your leave?
Most always. It is an accepted custom. As a matter of fact, 2 members of the Swedish Opera, Mr. Svan and Mr. Berglund, are right here in the Metropolitan on extended leaves.
I take it then, Madame Thorborg, that operatic management, even under government subsidy, has its headaches.
Yes, I am afraid so.
May I suggest that under government subsidy, all the people pay for opera with their taxes?
Go right ahead, Mr. Moscona.
I think this is something to remember. In America, the only people who pay are those who buy tickets or contribute their share to a fund such as the Metropolitan Opera Fund.
That's a very good point, Mr. Moscona. Oh, Miss Stevens, if we were back in a schoolroom, I'm sure by now you would be waving your hand and asking to speak.
I can hardly wait to get into this discussion, Mr. Brownlee. Talking about money troubles, I believe there is a misconception on the part of many Americans that the Metropolitan Opera, as one of the greatest repertory opera companies in the world, with heavy and inescapable overhead, should produce a profit. This is nothing but a delusion. If this could be accomplished, we would have the only repertory opera company of importance in the world to operate at a profit. I agree with Mr. Howard Taubman of the New York Times, who recently suggested that maybe, and I am quoting, the deficit of the Metropolitan Opera Company should not be smaller, but should be greater. We would then be able to do more new operas and new productions of the old masterpieces, have more rehearsals, new scenery and costumes, and then these elements of fine operatic production would be accomplished. If we would continue to have to save $1 here and $1 there, our productions will never reach the artistic heights that are possible. And this is why I think that the success of the present campaign is the grave responsibility of every opera lover in this country.
You speak with a good deal of fervor, Miss Stevens.
Oh, I hope I do, Mr. Brownlee. Great opera in this country is a public trust, not a business. We who love fine, grand opera might as well make up our minds that it will never pay for itself. But the good news is that it takes relatively so little to keep opera on an even keel, and there are so many who get so much from opera and are asked to give so little.
Miss Stevens, if this were a two-way radio, I'm sure the bravos would be echoing in from all over the nation. But there sits Louis D'Angelo, who over the years has become quite accustomed to plenty of bravos. We are all familiar with your singing voice, Mr. D'Angelo, but how about giving out with that speaking voice of yours? If you don't want to speak English, it's quite all right to go ahead in Italian.
Grazie, signor Brownlee. Se vuole, spiegherò tutto...
Now, that's quite enough. Now, stop your kidding, Mr. D'Angelo. We all know that you came over to this country when you were only 3 years old, and you've been an American citizen for years. So, we'll take English, if you don't mind.
Anything you say, Mr. Brownlee. Although I consider myself an American. I was born in Italy, and I'm very glad to represent Italy in this operatic United Nations Roundtable. You know Italy, Mr. Brownlee. You know opera in Italy is as popular as the movies are in this country. I could not imagine an Italian city without its opera house. All work and no play is not an Italian trait. The Italians love their opera, and Americans are getting that way too. Or I wouldn't have the privilege of singing to millions over these microphones.
You mean, Mr. D'Angelo, that you really think that the cultural things in life, such as opera, are actually so very important?
I certainly do. In Italy, they believe good opera is as important as good schools.
But in this campaign, Mr. D'Angelo, the Metropolitan is asking opera lovers to give, to make voluntary contributions to keep the Metropolitan on what is sometimes called a sort of a going basis. Do you feel that is proper?
Certainly I do. For Americans, that is our way, and it is part of what we call free economy. Our symphonies and colleges have private support, so it is up to those who enjoy opera to make it work. They say opera is not a national pastime in the United States. That's hard to believe when 12 or 15 millions listen to the opera every Saturday and certainly must want it. It is their free choice to listen to opera, but in turn, they must help when support is needed. Prego tutti signori e signore di contribuire a questa causa con perlomeno $1. Excuse me, Mrs. Brownlee.
Here we go again.
In my enthusiasm, I have dropped into my native tongue. What I said was, I urge every opera lover to share in this campaign, and let's put it over the top fast.
Oh, yes, Miss Resnik. I see you're slightly anxious to say something.